September 1, 1943. Rabaul Airfield on New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai halted his hand above the intelligence file, his single working eye the other destroyed by American fire a year before roving over lines that brought a burst of laughter in the sticky air of the ops tent. The Americans have rolled out a new fighter, as weighty as a bomber and as broad as a transport. Its name is Hellcat. Intelligence estimates say it tips the scales at double that of R-0. Just another failed American design. He gazed out through the tent flaps at his unit's A6M0 aircraft, neatly arranged atop their pierced steel matting. Sleek, agile, lethal. For 2 years, these planes had ruled over the Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes all had succumbed to the Zero's guns. Now the Americans' most recent creation, this bulky Hellcat, would fare no better. Sakai was unaware, as were all the other Japanese naval pilots assembling for the day's briefing, that exactly 1 month later, this so-called failure would usher in the systematic destruction of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would go on to secure a kill ratio of 19-1, shooting down 5,223 enemy planes and losing just 270 in air-to-air fighting. It would change the nature of carrier warfare, cripple Japanese air strength, and demonstrate that the Zero's dominance had rested on a flawed foundation. The calculus of control in the skies was about to be altered by a plane that appeared ungainly, handled heavily, and seemed to contravene all the design dogmas refined by Japanese engineers. Yet within half a year, those same pilots ridiculing the intel would be penning final letters home, fully aware that a clash with Hellcats meant near certain death by the numbers. The peak of the rising sun. The assurance of the Japanese Navy in September 1943 stemmed not from conceit, but numbers. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had racked up victory ratios that bordered on unbelievable. At Pearl Harbor, they forfeited 29 planes while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 downed for every 103 they felled. Over Darwin, 2 lost for 30 shot down. The aviation arm of the British Far East Fleet was utterly destroyed. The Dutch East Indies Air Force wiped out in mere days. Central to this supremacy was the Mitsubishi A6M0, an airplane that had revolutionized the standards of fighter design. When the Americans captured and tested one in 1942, engineers initially dismissed the performance data. Here was a fighter with bomber-like range, the agility of a biplane, and enough weaponry to obliterate anything within reach. The idea was almost implausible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishiwa, who would later achieve Ace of Aces status for Japan with 87 confirmed kills, summed up the Zero in his recovered personal journal. Piloting the Zero is as if you have grown wings. The machine answers to thought, not simply to the controls. American fighters feel like trucks. They are strong but unwieldy. Americans craft planes as they do automobiles, heavy, over-engineered, and inefficient. The Zero's astonishing capabilities were the product of an innovative approach to design. The use of superduralumin, a special aluminum compound, resulted in an airframe 30% lighter than any comparable American type. No armor plate shielded the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks to add bulk. In many cases, even the radio was omitted to shed weight. Every possible ounce gone for the sake of flight performance. Intelligence discarded. Early 1943 saw the initial reports on the F6F Hellcat reach Japanese intelligence, delivered via neutral channels from Sweden. The data came off as either boastful propaganda or perhaps intentional deceit. A loaded weight of 12,186 pounds. The Zero was only 5,800. A wingspan covering 334 square feet and a bulky radial engine. 2,400 rounds of ammunition on board, armor plating throughout, bullet-resistant glass, and self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Gender, the strategist behind Pearl Harbor, examined the data at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His opinion, which can still be read in the Japanese defense records, showed clear skepticism. The Americans have failed to change their approach. This Hellcat exemplifies their persistent but unsuccessful doctrine, attempting to compensate for pilot skill with sheer mechanical power. A Zero can easily outmaneuver it. The calculations appeared to validate this conclusion. The Zero possessed a wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot, resulting in a turning radius of 612 feet. With a wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot, the Hellcat was estimated to have a turning radius exceeding 900 feet. In a battle involving turning, which formed the cornerstone of all Japanese fighter maneuvers, the Hellcat stood no chance. The first sighting occurred on September 30, 1943. Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was on escort duty for a reconnaissance flight when he noticed them. 6 dark blue aircraft ascending from the southeast. His initial reaction, as stated in his after-action report, was that they were B-25 bombers on an odd route. However, as they changed direction, he recognized the unique profile: a single engine, a bulky fuselage, and wings that appeared too short for its frame. First engagement with an F6F type fighter, he would later note. Initial evaluation. The Americans had attached fighter weaponry to a torpedo bomber and were fighting in the usual manner. The usual manner involved utilizing the Zero's better turn performance to position itself behind the adversary. Fukui banked into a descending turn, predicting the cumbersome American fighter would maintain a straight line, enabling him to slot in at its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something never seen before occurred. The Hellcat did not retreat. It made no attempt to match his turn. Instead, it climbed upward. The Pratt & Whitney R28000 double Wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai, which delivered 1,130 horsepower, thrust the Hellcat skyward at 3,500 feet per minute. As Fukui tried to follow, he observed his airspeed drop as the Zero battled gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat executed a move thought impossible for such a heavy plane, a hammerhead turn that brought it directly behind Fukui. The American fired from 400 meters away, according to Fukui's report. 6 machine guns, not the expected 4. The rate of fire was like nothing seen before. My plane suffered 17 bullet holes in the 3 seconds that followed. Escaping was only possible by putting the plane into a spin. Fukui lived through the experience, barely reaching Marcus Island as his Zero was riddled with damage. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao, failed to return. The reconnaissance aircraft they escorted was also lost. The first victory went to the Hellcat, illustrating the paradox of its weight. On October 5, 1943, Task Force 14 attacked Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio led a group of 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to try intercepting what seemed another routine harassing raid. For months, U.S. carriers had launched these quick hits and rapid retreats, generally pulling out before Japanese planes could engage effectively. This time, however, events would take another turn. "We ascended to 20,000 feet," Shiga documented in his journal. "Below lay 12 F6F fighters arranged in 3 groups. We possessed all the benefits: altitude, position, and an element of surprise." Victory seemed inevitable. The ensuing battle overturned established Japanese tactical procedures. When the Zeros attacked the Hellcats from above, the American pilots held their formation and refrained from evasive maneuvers or turning. They pressed forward in formation, picking up speed in a shallow dive that preserved their momentum. As the Zeros unleashed gunfire from their extreme range, hoping to land chance shots, the Hellcats endured the barrage largely unfazed. The Hellcat's protective armor featured 212 pounds of plating shielding the cockpit, 110 pounds safeguarding the oil system, and self-sealing fuel tanks capable of withstanding multiple hits. Once the Zeros depleted their ammunition with these diving assaults, the Hellcats initiated their counteroffensive. Eschewing close-quarters maneuvering, they used their mass advantagefully. With engines at maximum output, they climbed upwards, reaching altitudes where the Zero's power plants struggled due to thin air. At an elevation of 25,000 feet, the Hellcat's engine still generated 1,650 horsepower. The Zero's output dropped to just 900. They fell upon us like hawks targeting sparrows, Chagall recorded. Their heavier frames provided them with speeds we simply could not equal. They would swoop down, unleash those 6 devastating cannons, and climb away before any of us could respond. 8 Zeros were destroyed in combat. All Hellcats returned without loss. This became known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot forecast. November 11, 1943, at Rabaul, pilots of the 204th Air Group gathered as Lieutenant Commander Dao Tanimizu outlined new American tactics. With 32 enemy aircraft downed, Tanimizu ranked among the rare aviators who had multiple experiences against Hellcats and survived. Disregard your previous understanding of aerial combat, he informed them. The Americans have overhauled the tactical landscape. They refuse to play by our rules any longer. Their approach is that of executioners, not traditional fighters. Tanimizu detailed the harsh lesson Japanese flyers were gradually, and often fatally, absorbing. The Hellcat was not engineered to surpass the Zero in turning efficiency. Its intended purpose was to make turning battles unnecessary. Adopting a method called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots preserved their velocity and altitude, transforming stored energy into attacking speed, which left Zero pilots no opportunity to take advantage of their superior agility. They operate in pairs, Tanimizu went on, one positioned above, the other below. As you confront one foe, the other is already descending upon you. Those radios, which we once ridiculed as excess weight, enable flawless teamwork. We fly as lone samurai, but they operate as a unified machine. The Technological Chasm, December 1943, TR Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, previously the leader of the Pearl Harbor raid, had taken the post of Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. By evaluating damaged Zeros returning from clashes against Hellcats, he identified the widening tech disparity. The difference in firepower numbers was plain and calculable. The Hellcat was equipped with 6 Browning M2 machine guns, each capable of firing 750 rounds per minute, for a combined rate of 4,500 rounds per minute. Every .50 caliber round was 46 grams in weight and exited the barrel at 2,900 feet per second, imparting 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's 27.7 mm machine guns launched 11-gram bullets at 2,300 feet per second, with a muzzle energy of 750 foot-pounds. However, the accounts of American fighter direction aided by radar were even more unsettling. Japanese pilots still used their vision to find opponents, but Hellcat pilots were steered toward their adversaries by radar operators aboard their ships, who could detect Japanese planes from a distance of 50 miles. Lieutenant Sadamu Kumachi recounted his first time encountering a radar-aimed interception. We ascended through clouds and were struck without warning or visual contact. Hellcats swooped down from above, precisely on our path and perfectly positioned. They had knowledge of our location, altitude, and heading. We fought blindly against those who could see in darkness. The pilot calculus. January 1944. The crisis facing Japanese pilots was becoming disastrous. Before the war, the Imperial Navy operated the world's most rigorous pilot training program. This training lasted 3 years, and pilots entered combat with 700 hours in the air. Pilots in the Army logged a minimum of 500 hours. These aviators mastered the complexities of aerial battle, being schooled in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual doctrine of air warfare. As 1944 began, the amount of flight instruction shrank. New naval pilots went into action with only 300 hours, Army pilots with 200. Shortages of fuel forced much of their training to be in gliders. Each pilot had only 50 rounds for live gunnery training. Formation flying, instrument navigation, and radio communication lessons were all cut to accelerate pilot deployment. On the American side, pilots showed up with at least 300 hours, including 50 in their assigned aircraft. They had fired thousands of rounds in practice sessions, drilled carrier landings until they became second nature, and learned the intricacies of energy-based maneuvers over safe Texas airstrips. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, Kasumagara Naval Air Station's training officer, said in his last report, "We are sending children to confront seasoned experts." The day before, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at his unit's front. He had never shot his machine guns during flight. "We possess no rounds for training." He had never attempted a night flight. "We have no fuel for this practice." He survived only 7 minutes in his first battle. The Formosa Disclosure, October 12 to 16, 1944. The Battle for Formosa. 2nd Air Fleet Commander, Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukuoka, risked every resource to prevent American carrier attacks on Formosa. This meant more than 700 aircraft, including the last adequately trained airmen from Homeland Training Wings. Japanese sources reported extraordinary victories: 26 enemy carriers and battleships lost, 300 aircraft downed. Yet, the actual outcome, as revealed in pilots' debriefs and developed gun camera film, was disastrous. True American losses were 89 aircraft, while the Japanese lost 329 planes and nearly all veteran flyers. Among the few who escaped was Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, who recalled the massacre in his memories. The Hellcats seemed omnipresent at every height. While ascending, they stayed above. When descending, they were below. They had subdivided the airspace into sectors, each one guarded by its own division. This was not a dogfight, he recounted, but orderly annihilation. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 19, 1944. In the Philippine Sea, the Japanese Navy fielded its rebuilt carrier fleet for Operation Ago, the battle plan to eliminate America's carrier strength in the Pacific. The force included 9 carriers and 450 aircraft, along with their finest pilots. Their opposition: Task Force 58, boasting 15 carriers and 956 planes, with 450 F6F Hellcats included. Admiral Jibaro Ozawa mounted 4 attack waves, trusting that Japanese pilot expertise and the Zero's range would secure victory. The first group of 69 planes launched at 8:30 a.m. U.S. radar picked them up at 150 miles. Hellcats were directed to intercept with flawless positioning. Higher altitude, sun at their back, striking from areas the Japanese couldn't scan. Lieutenant Zenji Arb, heading the fighter escort, glimpsed the Hellcats just before the fight. They soared between 20,000 and 30,000 feet, more than 60 strong, like a barrier of steel. We flew at 18,000 feet. Every variable benefited them. This confrontation lasted 12 minutes. Out of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 didn't return. Commander David McCampbell, leader of Air Group 15, downed 7 planes that day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, claimed 6 more. "The Zeros tried matching our turns," McCampbell explained. "We never allowed it. Attacking from above, we down 1, climbed swiftly to regain height." The Zero's attempts to follow resulted in stalls, and another Hellcat finished the job. By evening, the Japanese tally showed 346 carrier planes and 50 land-based ones destroyed. American losses were 30 planes from all reasons. That night, U.S. pilots in their ready rooms dubbed the event a turkey shoot. Their opponents had been as defenseless as game birds. The Leyte Gulf Record, October 24, 1944. The fight at Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell set his individual mission record here. Leading 7 Hellcats from the Essex, he intercepted a formation of 60 Japanese planes targeting the American fleet. In the ensuing hour and a half of battle, McCampbell eliminated 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman Roy Rushing scored 6. "I exhausted my ammo after my 9th victory," McCampbell wrote. "The Hellcat never faltered. Despite being outnumbered 8-1, my plane was unharmed." This encounter proved air dominance had shifted entirely. A mere 7 Hellcats routed a formation of 60 Japanese craft, eliminating 15 without losses. McCampbell's twin ace in a day feats 7 kills on June 19 and 9 on October 24 earned him both the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The psychological collapse. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles led Japanese military psychologists to describe a condition among their survivors as Hellcat psychosis. Admiral Ozawa, in his subsequent report, wrote, "The enemy's use of radar-aided fighter guidance accomplished what we considered impossible: the mechanization of aerial combat. Each Hellcat wasn't just a lone plane but part of a massive system. Our aces, whatever their skill, weren't confronting individual aircraft but an integrated mechanism." The scarcity of pilots grew so severe that, by early 1945, Navy pilot training was down to 40 to 50 hours, Army airmen to 60 to 70 hours. Kamikaze airmen underwent just 40 to 50 hours, roughly a week's training. The Okinawa Cataclysm, April through June 1945. Operation Iceberg. Japan launched 1,900 kamikaze strikes against U.S. ships near Okinawa. The Hellcat's role shifted from a fighter to a defender against the horror of suicide assaults. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia led his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, besting 23 Japanese planes during the campaign. His strategic innovation involving teams of 4 fighters working together rendered traditional Japanese approaches utterly fatal. As Valencia described, "We came up with what we termed the mowing machine. 4 Hellcats, flying side by side and spaced 100 yards apart, would charge through enemy formations at speed. Each pilot guarded his area. One pass, then we'd climb and do it again." The statistics for Okinawa were stark. Hellcats flew a total of 38,038 combat missions, claimed 2,351 victories, and lost 249 planes, a 9.5 to 1 ratio. Perhaps of greatest consequence, they prevented about 80% of kamikaze planes from striking their objectives. The technology divide. By 1945, the gap in technology between both sides could not be closed. The F6F Hellcat featured upgrades enhancing its lethality. Power increased to 2,200 horsepower via water injection, zero-length rocket launchers, reinforced armor, and the K-14 gunsight that offered automatic lead computation. Famed ace Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai officially credited with 28 kills, though today historians think around 15 as accurate, faced Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his prowess, he barely survived his first dogfight. He wrote in his memoir, "I executed all my top maneuvers, loops, rolls, split-s, everything I'd perfected in 200 fights. Yet the Hellcat stayed right with me as if unconcerned. Only an oversight by the American pilot forgetting to drop his auxiliary tank saved me." The human toll. By the end of the war, F6F Hellcats had downed 5,223 enemy aircraft in dogfights, lost 270 to hostile planes, had a 19.3 to 1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, and were responsible for 75% of all Navy aerial kills. Japan's loss was immense. Of the 18,000 naval aviators at the start of World War II, under 100 with combat experience were left by August 1945. The kamikaze calculus. The shift from elite naval aviation to the kamikaze reflected full recognition of Hellcat dominance. Unable to succeed in regular aerial combat, Japan made its pilots human bombs. Kamikaze mastermind Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi rationalized this with simple math. A zero's chances in traditional attack on a carrier were virtually nil. The Hellcats would prevail. But if the zero became an explosive, the chance of a successful impact climbed to 30%. Death was certain either way, but at least as a kamikaze, the pilot's death counted for something. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishiawa accompanied the first acknowledged kamikaze sortie, directed by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, and logged his 86th and 87th kills, shooting down 2 Hellcats. On October 26, 1944, Nishiawa perished as a passenger when a Hellcat from VF-14 shot down his transport. Japan's leading ace, without a fighter, met his end at the hands of the aircraft he once outmatched. The closing testament. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's declaration of surrender. At Atsugi Air Base, Captain Minoru Genda, initially dismissive of the Hellcat as too heavy, was present to hear the emperor's address. The remainder of Japanese naval aviation surrounded him, young pilots with just 40 flight hours, aircraft cobbled together from loose parts, tanks dry. Meanwhile, NN Clarence Moore of VF-31, taking off from USS Bellewood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber just after 2 p.m., the last air-to-air kill of World War II. The Japanese pilot, probably unaware of the peace announcement, approached the U.S. fleet and was intercepted by Moore. 2 quick fusillades from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific aerial conflict. The occupation revelation, September 1945, Atsugi Air Base. The initial American machines to land after Japan's capitulation were a dozen F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese airmen, technicians, and support staff lined the airstrip to observe their former nemesis close-up. American ace Lieutenant Robert Basu, credited with 19 victories, displayed the Hellcat's full range before the Japanese flyers. His casual aerobatics loops, rolls, and steep climbs would have pushed a Zero beyond its breaking point and left the onlookers awestruck. "You must realize," Bachu clarified through a translator, "this is without utilizing its full capabilities. In battle, with water injection, it has 20% more power. It's engineered to withstand 13 Gs. I've never damaged one yet." The technical autopsy. Japanese engineers examining captured Hellcats after the conflict learned the full scale of America's industrial prowess. The Pratt & Whitney R-28,000 engine comprised 2,840 precisely machined components, each part able to substitute in any other R-28000. By contrast, the Nakajima Sakai engine needed bespoke fitting. No two were the same. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the Zero's designer, conducted an exhaustive study of the Hellcat after hostilities ceased. His findings were conclusive. "We designed for 1941, they engineered for 1945. While we fussed over the sword, they spawned the industrial future." The production marvel. Grumman's manufacturing of the Hellcat was itself a strategic asset. The Bethpage, New York, plant ran around the clock. At peak, a Hellcat left the line every 60 minutes. In just 30 months, 12,275 Hellcats were built, a feat the Japanese found impossible to conceive. In 1944, all Japanese fighter production totaled 5,100 units, whereas the Americans turned out 35,000 in that year alone. Their production line used innovations alien to the Japanese, such as color-coded instructions, relentless shift work, and consistent output without compromise in build quality. The era-shifting change. The Hellcat did more than win engagements, it changed Navy strategy forever. Prior thinking held that carriers had to strike first or face destruction. The Hellcat reversed this logic. Carriers now acted as citadels, resilient to air assault. Admiral Mark Mitcher, chief of Task Force 58, recognized this transformation. With Hellcats in the air, he remarked, "Our carriers no longer need to find the enemy first. Let them attack. The F6F will eliminate them at our discretion." This confidence ushered in new levels of offensive flexibility. U.S. flatops could linger in hostile waters indefinitely, the Hellcat shield making them all but untouchable by air power. A cultural collision. What the Hellcat brought went deeper than superior technology. It symbolized an entirely different way of war, negating the essence of Japanese doctrine. The samurai ideal stressed individual mastery, inner strength, and a readiness for death. By contrast, the Hellcat stood for systematic precision, technological advantage, and preservation of one's own. This divide was so broad that Japanese pilots could not adapt to Hellcat procedures even when they became aware of them. The core principle, avoiding engagement when at a disadvantage, central to Hellcat operations, was literally beyond the conception of Japanese aviators indoctrinated in Bushido. History's verdict. In 1962, the U.S. Navy convened a conference on aviation in the Pacific conflict, bringing both American and Japanese veterans together to reflect upon the war. Captain David McCampbell, America's top-scoring ace with 34 wins, said simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War. End of story. It eradicated Japanese air strength and made our triumph certain." Commander Saburo Sakai followed. The Zero was a finer fighter plane. The Hellcat, though, was a superior weapon system. We didn't grasp that until it was too late. We brought swords to a modern battle and then wondered at our defeat. The ultimate reckoning. Hellcat mastery boiled down to basic numbers telling a dramatic tale. With a kill ratio of 19-1 overall, and 13-1 specifically against Zeros, 12,275 Hellcats rose from assembly lines in 2.5 years. In comparison, between 1943 and 1945, about 6,000 Zeros were produced. More than 5,000 American airmen learned to fly Hellcats. By August 1945, less than 100 Japanese combat-ready pilots remained. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, once Pacific Fleet Chief at the Philippine Sea, perhaps offered the most candid reflection. "We mocked the Hellcat because we didn't realize it stood not merely for a plane, but for an entire civilization's way of waging war. By the time we abandoned our derision, our air power was gone." The last word. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai survived until the year 2000. When asked late in life about the Hellcat, he summed up its supremacy succinctly. "The Zero enabled Japan to achieve naval greatness. The Hellcat forced Japan to see it was not as mighty as believed. We imagined ourselves as samurai. The Hellcat made plain we were simply men, reliant on dated arms, confronting the future." Every Japanese airman alive at the end of the war owes their life to a Hellcat pilot sparing them. That's the utmost defeat, surviving only by an enemy's mercy. The F6F Hellcat went into service with double the weight of the Zero. Outfitted with armor the Zero never had. Driven by an engine impossible for the Japanese to manufacture. Sporting armaments they couldn't rival. Using radars they were unable to detect. Piloted by aviators whose training they could not equal and produced in figures they could not imagine. Japanese flyers had ridiculed it, not understanding that every added pound was not weakness but evidence of a broad industrial democracy's capability to protect its soldiers. When realization came, their mockery turned into farewell letters, their laughter became kamikaze attacks, their assurance crumbled utterly. The Hellcat had triumphed not just over the Zeros. It destroyed an entire military philosophy, illustrating that in modern conflict, nations constructing superior systems annihilate those limited to building exceptional warriors. The Japanese pilots laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat always had the final laugh. That was always the case.